Today we look at Pope Francis's biggest accomplishments. What are people saying in advance of the papal visit to America? And what exactly does Planned Parenthood do and what don't they do? This is Free Range Q&A with Al Cresta. And welcome to this edition of Free Range Q&A with Al Cresta, where we take your emails, Facebook, and Twitter questions. Let's jump right to the first question. What do you think are Pope Francis's biggest accomplishments to date? Is it a specific action, such as the annulment refinement, or allowing open debate about how the church should address gay people? Is it his openly joyous, merciful persona? This comes from Angie in Sarasota, Florida.
None of those are really big achievements. His persona, maybe so. In fact, I would say his biggest achievement to date has been the way he's been able to arrest the attention of the media. Yes. And oftentimes they've simply misconstrued what he has said, and they've tried to create a big separation, a big gap between him and his predecessors, Pope John Paul II and Pope Benedict. Let me give you an example from just one of his most famous quotes. Who am I to judge? Now, this was completely misconstrued by the secular press. Pope Francis was referring to a particular person who was being considered for ministry within the church, and allegedly there had been some bad history, and it was being investigated. Now, this is what Pope Francis actually said. A gay person who is seeking God, who is of good will, well, who am I to judge him? The Catechism of the Catholic Church explains this very well. It says one must not marginalize these persons. They must be integrated into society. The problem isn't this homosexual orientation. We must be like brothers and sisters. The problem is something else. The problem is lobbying, either for this orientation or a political lobby or a Masonic lobby. Now, Pope Benedict would have said exactly the same thing, with the possible exception of using the word gay. It's a colloquial word that probably Pope Benedict wouldn't have used. Pope Francis uses it because he likes to think of himself, and he is, a more street-level kind of preacher. But this is hardly revolutionary. He appeals to the teaching of the Catechism, and the Catechism that he's referring to makes two major points. No unjust discrimination against homosexuals, and no homoerotic acts. So I don't think, even with this case, he didn't make any changes at all, but the press chose to drive a wedge between him and his predecessors. And he's just simply a more engaging and popular type of personality than Benedict XVI, who was a really soft-spoken, gracious German professor who liked nuance.
Yeah. No wedge, you say. No wedge being between those two popes.
Absolutely not.
Another one on Pope Francis from Teresa in Atlanta, Georgia. Every pope has his critics. What do you hear from your radio listeners and colleagues? Do folks think he bends the rules and the expectations for a true adherence to the Catholic faith?
It's a good question. And it's actually a very difficult question because, one, most listeners seem to really love and respect Pope Francis, even though they find him challenging. His call to discipleship is a tough call. There are some who have a very adult understanding of the papacy, and they don't mind well-targeted criticisms of some of his statements. Remember, papal infallibility, our doctrine of the papacy, doesn't require that a pope say the right thing at the right time in the right way. He can be clumsy many times, and we've had popes who haven't been very articulate, and they've waited too long to say some things. So, in these an adult Catholic who's not trying to undermine the papacy is free to offer those kind of criticisms, and we have a lot of listeners who are able to do that. We do have a vocal but relatively small group who are actually quite furious, and these are people who have received their social doctrine. They've been catechized by Rush Limbaugh and Mark Levin, and Sean Hannity, and Michael Savage. And so that's where their spiritual social doctrine formation has come. And they're very upset because, to be frank, they have a reason to be upset. One of them is in the Pope's understanding of capitalism. He writes that laissez-faire capitalism is unacceptable. Well, that's not new. That's always been said by the popes ever since Rerum Novarum and Pope Leo XIII. The problem is we can't find laissez-faire capitalism anywhere. It doesn't exist in any country. So what we've got is Pope Francis addressing an idea and everybody wondering where in the world is that thing to be found? And you can't find anywhere. Virtually all economies in the world globally are regulated in some way. They're not laissez-faire capitalist countries. People were concerned about that he was hopping on the environmental bus, and he was going to be a great champion of global warming. Read the encyclical. It's true, there's an alarmist tone there, but the real point is not what has been being made by most environmentalists. Well, he had an advisor on the Pontifical Academy of the Sciences who claimed that the Earth could only sustain 1 billion people. The whole encyclical is a repudiation of that advisor's teaching. The Pope doesn't see human beings as a scourge or a cancer on the face of the earth. The Pope thinks human beings are the solution. We were put here to steward, cultivate, make sure that the creation reaches its end. We start in a garden, we're going to end in a city. So it has to be good stewardship to get there. That's what the Pope is calling on. He's not asking us to belittle human dignity in order to embrace snail darters. He is about lifting humanity, maintaining that we have a job, and that is creation care.
And you've said many times that Laudatio Si has some of the best biblical exposition that you've ever seen in encyclicals.
It is. The section of the encyclical that deals with the biblical and theological material on creation care is about as good as anything I've ever seen from any writer anywhere. This Pope doesn't have a liberal or conservative political agenda. He wants to be faithful to what it means to be a Catholic. And just like Jesus can't be made into a Republican or a Democrat, a conservative or a liberal, Pope Francis can't be put into any of those pigeonholes.
Well, when he comes next week, I think some people might be surprised at that fact.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Let's see, from Tanya in Ann Arbor. I saw a clip of the Miss America pageant where a contestant was asked if she supported shutting down the government in order to defund Planned Parenthood. Her answer was no, because they mostly do women's health, like cancer screening, sterilization, birth control, and mammograms. I've heard a lot of differing information since these undercover videos came out. What does Planned Parenthood do and not do?
Can we hear that video?
We can.
Legislators are threatening to shut down the government over federal contributions to Planned Parenthood, even though no federal funds can be used for abortions. Should Planned Parenthood funding be cut off?
I don't think Planned Parenthood funding should be cut off. The $500 million that gets given to Planned Parenthood every single year goes to female care. It goes for scanning for cancer. It goes for mammograms. And if we don't give that funding to Planned Parenthood, those women will be out of health care for reproductive causes.
Planned Parenthood doesn't do mammograms. Planned Parenthood doesn't do prenatal care. If every Planned Parenthood was defunded tomorrow and they were off the face of the earth, for every one that disappeared, there are now 20 comprehensive health clinics that would handle women's health. We don't need Planned Parenthood because we don't need an institution founded by a eugenicist, Margaret Sanger, who to the end of her days was feared that the lesser breeds would outbreed the higher breeds. We don't need an institution like that on our soil. Planned Parenthood does, however, broker aborted baby body parts, and they do actually change their abortion procedure to retrieve those body parts, which is a violation of basic medical ethics, which always treats the patient first. And in their mind, there's only one patient there, and that's the mother. We also know from these recent revelations that they perform partial birth abortions, apparently. In order to maintain, they have better body parts, more intact body parts. We don't need that kind of institution in America.
That is all the time we have for this week and this week's questions. Do you have a question for listeners that you want them to comment on?
I do. Respond in the comment box below. Has Pope Francis been a help or a hindrance to your personal evangelism, your work in sharing Christ with others? Has he been a help or a hindrance?
Thank you, Al, for those answers today, and thank you for submitting those questions. If you'd like to be on the next Free Range Q&A with Al Kresta, we need you to submit your questions. No question is too easy. No question is too hard. Just hit us up on Twitter or Facebook or email freerange@avemariaradio.net. That's freerange@avemariaradio.net, and we'll see you later.